With some of life's greatest struggles, the ones that feel impossible to conquer, there's almost always a layer of toxic shame that's gone unchecked as it feeds us fear and lies about who we are and what we're capable of.
I was done looking at the scale. There was a lot of shame in it. I just really was like, there's no need. We know I'm obese. Why deal with it?
Today, Francie can say she's lost 140 pounds, and she's now helping others conquer obesity too. But her successful journey to better health had less to do with food and exercise, and so much more to do with uncovering a lifetime of trauma and shame.
First off, how I came about into this world. My parents were not married, and one was a pastor and the other was a prominent figure in the church who was married, and the two had an affair and produced me. That, let alone, was a lot of shame growing up. Just the dynamics of my family. There was a lot of anger. My sister passed away 2 years after, and I was told the reason why God allowed that to happen was because of my mom's affair. And so I felt that I was a negative in this world, not a positive.
To Francie, inadequacy and unworthiness felt like the truth of who she was. And she carried those feelings into adulthood, eventually unfazed and unconcerned about her health as her weight approached 300 pounds.
When a friend of mine looked at me and said, "Are you worried about your health?" I looked at her and I was like, no. Even though I was sick, even though I was in and out of the hospital, pre-diabetic, autoimmune disorder, bone pain, joint pain, migraines, I didn't want to go out. I paid people to take my kids to do stuff. I was raising kids and alone, and I was on autopilot.
Some looking in from the outside would call it laziness or letting yourself go. But the truth is, her weight was her protection, an unconscious effort to numb the layers of pain already there and protect her from more trauma.
I became numb. I have learned that you can become so afraid that you cross a barrier of fear and become numb.
Despite her inability to feel for herself, something shifted. With her health suffering, Francie knew if she wanted to be around for her boys, she had to make a change. But as she set out to conquer obesity, she came to a roadblock.
If you cannot come to terms with your past, you cannot propel yourself into a successful future. What happened to me was I had lost about 70-some pounds, started plateauing. I was like, oh gosh, I'm gonna fail at this. People are watching me. I'm gonna fail at this. I can't figure out why I can't go past this part.
We often get stuck when our minds and our hearts are on totally different pages. Francie's mind wanted to lose weight, but her heart, it was still protecting her.
I woke up in the middle of the night to a voice, and for me, I believe it was God, saying, "You believe I love everybody else, but you don't believe I love you. But I'm gonna show you I do." And so he brought me to the scripture, and it says, "You will love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself." And God started showing me, it goes God, me, and then other people. And in the church, it's taught God, other people, yourself. From that point on, I started reading about other people's journey to self-love. And then all of a sudden, I started having terrible nightmares. Like the kind that you wake up screaming, where you wake up like crying, and you wake up, just sweat rolling down your brow. My bed is soaked from sweat. One of them was, I was about 8 or 9 years old in my bedroom, and there was somebody laying on top of me, and he was holding me down. And then in this dream, when he was done doing his thing, he looked at me with just like hatred, and he took his fist and he pounded over and over and over into my stomach. And I was just laying there. It was nerve-wracking to look at this girl in this dream thinking, why isn't she fighting back? Why isn't she crying? And all of my dreams were about a girl having violent sexual trauma. It was just complete craziness.
With the help of her pastor's wife and a professional counselor, Francie realized her nightmares were actually suppressed memories from her childhood.
I was, of course, diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, anger, all this stuff. And I really believe that pedophiles kind of know. They prey on the weak. I don't know why the equation equaled me, but it did.
From everything Francie and her counselor have pieced together, they estimate the abuse started when she was only 3 years old, and that she was a victim to more than a dozen abusers throughout her childhood. But it was one relative in particular who was the main offender, and their relationship created even more shame for Francie.
When I was about 12, I had started my period, and as my counselor explained, some abusers, that is not a turn on to them. Your innocence of a childhood is the turn on to them. For me and this main person, that's when he no longer was attracted to me. The problem was, and my counselor explained this to me, and it's very, very common, and I want you to understand the reason why I really want to talk about this is to bring up this shame that's out there about this, is this person had been my attacker on a regular basis. That, again, I moved past the fear into numbness. And so my mind learned a coping skill of accepting him, and I had formed a love for him. And then the day that he decided he no longer wanted me was complete rejection. The day that he finally rejected me, we had just gone to the backyard like normal, and he just looked at me and put his hands on my pants and said, "No more." I remember looking at him and saying, "What do you mean?" And he just said, "No more," and he left.
Did he beat you?
No. And he left. Never will forget that day. And I know that was the day that my mind just flipped. I transitioned into a person that lived so afraid that you become numb to dangerous living. So I sought male attention any way it would come. And then, as I got older and started dating, it was nothing for me to give of myself to them. It just was normal. And you hear all the time, "Why didn't you tell anybody?" But for some reason, I knew I couldn't tell anybody, but I think that was because every single time he took his fist and would punch me in the stomach every time afterwards.
When Francie looks back at photos as a tiny little girl, She can noticeably see how her smile changed after the abuse started. It's just one tiny sign of the nightmare she was living.
As I'm going through these memories and more memories are developing, I became aware that there was some adults in my life that knew abuse was happening and didn't protect me. There was one memory where my mother was allowing this lady, adult lady, and then she had a daughter, to babysit me. And her daughter had actually been the one abusing me. The mom walked in, looked at me, freaked out on me, and then told my mom I was doing that to her daughter. And my mom never once asked me if I was okay. Never once said, "Can you explain your side of the story?" I came home. I remember that car ride very well. It was quiet. I came home and my mother took me to the back room and took out her leather belt and she beat me. When she was done with the beatings, I remember at some point during the day watching all the kids on the block playing, but I remember watching them thinking, I wish I was them. Why am I in this situation?
The extremely religious setting Francie was brought up in only made her feel more judged by God and more unworthy of love.
I think my mind started thinking, because of what was going on in my childhood, there was this breach between God and I. And, I was raised that if there's sin in your life, God stepped back. And my mom would every night bow at her bed and pray for people to have good, healthy lives. And here her daughter is tormented. And I remember laying there thinking, why, God, can't you answer her prayers for me? So I got really angry with God. And I remember going into my counselor's office one day, and I just looked at her and I said, I'm really angry at God. I don't even know if I actually believe that there is a God. And if there is a God, He owes me an apology. And I looked at her and I said, I know I should be, hunched underneath the table, waiting for the lightning rod to zap me dead. But, at this point, I've had such a miserable life. Okay. Let it happen. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen,
As I've heard people share their stories of shame, there is often a defining moment they all talk about when they were finally able to unchain themselves from the lies shame tells and lift the burden of unworthiness off their shoulders. This was one of those moments for Francie.
I left that appointment and I was heading to work, and I just felt all of a sudden something was different in my car. And I'm driving and I'm looking over, and all of a sudden there is this figure in my car. And he had a tan skin, round face, curly hair, very naturally curly hair, and it was short. And I knew who he was. I knew it was Jesus. I'm looking at him and we're starting to communicate in our mind. And he's talking about the day that the babysitters that came up and my mom took me home and beat me. And I'm like, I'm really angry at you. How could you let this happen to me? And he said, I want you to know I wept for you that day. And he had his head in the palm of his hands and he was weeping in the car. I realized something, and that was that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, full of love and grace and mercy, but He has restrictions, and that is people's will. That day was the first day that I literally understood that There was some things good in my life and some things bad, but it was up to me to make the choice regarding how it was going to end. I literally that day forgave my mom and forgave the abusers, and I walked into my work a different person. I've only shared the car experience with very few people, because some people might think, oh my gosh, this lady literally is crazy. But it was very real. Now, maybe my mind created it, maybe, I don't know. All I know is that it was real to me, and it was part of my healing process. And I'm thankful for it. For some reason, that had to happen to me for me to heal, to forgive. I felt emotions that day I had not felt in I don't even know how long.
That day was also the first time she was able to look back at the little girl inside her in a different light.
When I looked at that girl, I didn't look at her in shame. I looked at her with compassion. And I, for the first time, realized it was not my fault. Not one bit. I literally just was like, free. Now, let me tell you, you don't just overnight and even in weeks heal from such traumatic childhood. I will be healing for the rest of my life.
Pain comes to all of us in different forms. And while healing from it is possible, it's never linear. Old wounds can resurface at the most unexpected times, and so healing takes a continued courage and commitment to be willing to sit with the truth of our stories, care for them with compassion, and know that our pain can be turned into purpose, but only if we're open to it.
For me now, how does this all play into, my weight loss and healthy lifestyle? It's so important to deal with the what's causing me to fail. If you're hitting a roadblock every time, you're not a failure. You just have issues that you are either too afraid to deal with or you're too ashamed to deal with them. I'm here to tell you, when you do, it is the best thing in the whole wide world, and you'll find out you're not alone. You are not alone. The few that I have shared my story to, they have literally sat at tables and wept and said, I thought I was alone in this. I was too afraid to share my story.
I hear this in every story of shame I share. You are not alone. And it's one of the greatest gifts a human can ever give or receive. For in that gift lies the permission for someone to be exactly who they are.
It's really hard for people to accept it's okay to love themselves. I had to discover that love for me. That through thick and thin, Francie. You love yourself because God created you for a purpose. And I think He actually likes me. Really, I really do. I think He actually likes me, and to have that revelation is just crazy. But through this whole process, a confidence within myself has developed that I've never had. And I know that my past is my past, it's at rest, but it doesn't determine my future.
Today, Francie has transformed her pain into purpose, forming a health and fitness program called Battle Ready.
People can request to meet with me, consult with me. It helps when you have a community. It helps when you have people who've been through it, people who are going through it, to encourage and inspire each other. And I really firmly believe that in this weight loss world, that we're missing the mark for successful, lifelong change by not dealing with the whole person. And so let's work out the full person, not just the weight. Those are just numbers. That's just appearance. Let's deal with inside. Of course, always refer to a professional counselor, but I'll be their friend. And it's so fulfilling because I know it's my purpose, it's my calling, but this is what it's all about. Isaiah 61:3, beauty for ashes. I mean, you can take anything in your childhood, in your history, and once you allow the healing process to happen, I am telling you, you will see beauty in ashes. I see beauty everywhere I go. And through all of this has become a confidence that I can tackle the world, I can tackle problems, I can even tackle myself, and I can help other people tackle themselves too.